So Joel Plaskett, you have a new album, the Park Avenue Sobriety Test. It seems like it's your most personal album, at least that I've heard so far. Can you tell me a little bit about what went into the album?
Well, the songs kind of span the past couple of years, and we cut a lot of the record live off the floor. It's kind of there's a lot of variety on the record in terms of the styles, and it is a personal record for me. It's funny, whenever I'm making a record, I'm kind of searching for an overarching theme to kind of decide which songs are going to go on it. This one was a little bit of a challenge because I knew there were some songs I really wanted on there, and I was trying to figure out how they connected to other songs. And not to say that it's not the most obvious connection all the time, but because I knew that there was going to be rock songs and some ballads, I wanted there to be a theme to tie the kind of diversity together. And it's kind of a record about just where I am at in my life. Like, I'm 39 right now, and just sort of it's observational as much as it is autobiographical. It's not entirely autobiographical, but it there's a lot of just observing the challenges that some of my people I know have had, other people just that I don't know, just to kind of you start seeing like the divide between the rich and the poor and all these things. It's not a political record, but it's starting to creep into the writing a little bit.
Absolutely. I think for me, the heart of the record is that suite of songs from the last telephone booth, and going through like Hard Times and the other tracks, kind of between those. Sure. The heart of it seems really like a sort of a vulnerable, hey, looking at that issue of sort of wealth and poverty right next to each other, and the hard times that people are facing. Is there anything you think that particularly spurred that on this time?
I don't know. I think there's a number of things that kind of contributed to it. Becoming a parent may have had something to do with it. It's not like there's a bunch of songs about my son on there, but certainly when you start thinking about what kind of world your child is going to inhabit, you start looking at the world a little more closely. It's not to say that I wasn't aware of things before that. And then also, I guess trying to, when you're trying to be in the present with your family and care about these things that are happening, but then, I've been like a touring musician my entire adult life, so I kind of always have one foot in this nostalgic past. And so the record's kind of wrestling those two worlds a little bit. Is sort of like, well, this is what I do, this is what I've done, what am I doing now, and how do I kind of just trying to find the joy in life amidst the challenges, and I think that's what everybody's trying to do. I just tried to articulate it a little bit, and I find myself getting more like angry about things that I think are kind of wrong with the world, the way the world is running, and so I figured I'd use my voice to at least express an opinion. I don't know. It's hard. It's funny because the more you engage in that kind of stuff, the more fatiguing it can be, and the more then you end up talking about it. And I kind of recognize that like what I do is supposed to be entertainment, but I also want it to have some meaning, right? Mm-hmm. So.
It's almost like some of the characters on the album are, they're dealing with the bank and dealing with the landlord, and with a little bit of whiskey running through their veins to sort of cope with it. Right. It's almost that way. But
yeah, I mean, one thing I've been lucky my whole life. I haven't lived in poverty, and I've lived a really middle class existence, from the suburbs growing up and stuff. But my studio's on Portland Street in downtown Dartmouth, and it's sort of a street that has. It's kind of in transition. There's lots of like old bars with guys who are there every day at from 4 till midnight, right? And a lot of really great people and characters on the street, and I think just kind of observing. What I find sometimes we do is we project this idea that like things are hard for people. There's no doubt about that. There's this struggle, but then at the same time, I don't want to presume what somebody's thinking. And so I guess I think that's what sort of found its way into the writing, was like how to, empathy, obviously, and but also not some sort of like presumption that like money equals happiness. It certainly does not, right? And so that's sort of in the writing moment.
It's also very much a kind of a loose-limbed kind of rockin' album. Like you can hear yourself calling out to the engineer, going, "Hey Thomas, are you getting this down?" and that kind of thing. And it definitely it's got that rockin' feel to it as well. Were you conscious of wanting to have a kind of a looser atmosphere in the studio?
Yeah, well, we cut more than half the record is live off the floor with the vocals included. And it was so fun, and it was the Emergency played on it, Dave and Chris, but also some past members of the band, and there's about 20 people playing on the record in total, and so I wanted it to sound like there's all these sort of melancholy songs on the record, but there's also a lot of really upbeat ones, and even the ones that are dealing with more serious subject matter, I still wanted to have fun recording them, and it was like there's a song called Captains of Industry, which is probably one of the more intense songs on the record, but we cut that live off the floor with a live vocal and everything, and everybody just kind of honed in on it over the course of 3 or 4 hours, and it was sort of it was one of the more satisfying experiences I've had in the studio making this record. Was actually the focus that everybody brought, and there's still parts on the record that I'm hearing that I didn't know that people. I'm like, who played that? Like, I mean, I know who was on what instrument, but sometimes there's these blurry moments where I'm like, is that piano or organ? There's this like swirl, and it reminds me a little more of like some of the records I love that I've never been able to tap, like Blonde on Blonde, or some of the Dylan stuff that's cut off the floor. I'm not saying it's that good or sounds like that, but there is that kind of live wire element to some of those performances. Jim Ford's Harlan County is a record I keep going back to, and it was a big influence on this record in terms of something about it just kind of sparked me to want to get that live feel.
This is a hard one, but when you're writing songs, does do you get what sort of kicks a song off? Is it a lyric, or is it a riff, or does a progression come to mind, or is there a mood you want to try and establish, or is it all of those things?
It is all of those things. There's never one recipe. Like in the case of the title track from the record, the Park Avenue Sobriety Test, that was a quip that my neighbor made, Roy. There was a bent-up guardrail on Park Avenue, a street that I walked by in my neighborhood, and I was talking to him about it later. A car had come down and run into it. They couldn't make the turn. There's 2 hard turns on this street called Park Avenue. I said, you see the bent-up guardrail? He's like, yeah, that's the Park Avenue Sobriety Test. So I was like, well, I'm going to write a song called that. And so that was, that one was just a title when it began, and then it turned into, I figured, okay, I know what it's going to be about, and then I wrote it. Other times, it's a turn of phrase that just pops into my head. I'm kind of like, I'll hum a lot, and I'll just make stuff up. I'll wing it a lot. I'll rhyme incessantly, and occasionally something will go, and I'll often write with a train of thought and not edit myself until later. So I'll maybe write more verses than I need, or I'll just wing it and go, I don't even know if this is connected, but for some reason it sings good. There's a song called All Right Okay, which is that kind of train of thought writing, where I just was like, what's gonna rhyme? I kind of knew there was a story, but I wasn't gonna like figure it out. And so then at the end I might remove some things, or I'll check and balance things to make sure that there's actually a meaning to it all. Other songs are a little more pointed and deliberate in terms of what I'm trying to say.
What advice would you give in these times where rock and roll isn't really the sort of dominant medium of music going on, or popular music that's going on? What would you advise a young SOCAN member who's starting out and wants to rock and roll? What would you say to that person, or what would be the key piece of advice you'd give to them?
I just think it's fundamental that I guess maybe everybody sings songs they care about, but I think it's more like you need to really, you want to inhabit your music, and you want to find your voice within it. And so whatever you're doing, whether it's rock, and certainly rock is maybe not as in vogue as it once was, but I think people can suss something that's real. And like when you take ownership of something that you wrote, and you sing it with conviction, and you get your skills together to deliver that, if you have conviction in that, it's not to say that it's always going to be acknowledged or sell a lot of records or whatever, but I really believe that it kind of starts with having something to say, and even if it isn't like about lyrics, it's like you still have to have something like a mission statement, other than just trying to be successful for success's sake, right? That's really not what music is about, at least for me. For me, it's about like delivering. It's like expressing myself and delivering something of substance, So if you can keep your eye on the substance, then you can kind of get there.
Congratulations on the new album, and thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Howard. Nice talking to you, man.